5th of February 1992, Mirage Casino, Las Vegas, Nevada. The casino floor is packed. Dealers shout across the tables. Chips clatter in stacks, and eyes of security watch every corner. At the crowded blackjack table, a young woman in a sleek dress tosses out small, meaningless bets. To anyone watching, she's just another casual player. Then, as the cards are dealt, she scratches her arm. A subtle motion no one notices, except one. A man in a wheelchair rolls toward the table. His hands shake slightly as he places his buy-in on the felt. The dealer counts the bills, $100,000 in cash. Within moments, towers of high-value chips rise in front of him. The first hand begins. He pushes forward $25,000. The pit boss glances over. The bet is enormous, out of nowhere. Cameras above tilt down, looking on his face. He doesn't blink. The cards drop. He splits, doubles down, pushes another $50,000 across the felt. The tension at the table spikes. Players lean back, watching in silence. In just a few minutes, the man in the wheelchair rakes in more than $200,000. The dealer forces a smile. The pit boss doesn't. Upstairs, security staff scramble. They've seen him before. Same face, but last time, he wasn't in a wheelchair. On the floor, the chips keep sliding his way. $300,000, then $4. The casino is bleeding, and there's nothing they can prove. By the time security makes their move, it's already too late. The players vanish into the crowd, cash in hand. And before the sun comes up, they'll be boarding a flight back to Boston. Just another group of students heading home. This wasn't luck. It was a system, a team of college kids who had built the most successful card-counting operation the casinos had ever seen. And from here, the hunt for his team began. Cambridge, Massachusetts, late 1970s. Inside the classrooms of MIT, gambling wasn't supposed to be more than a curiosity, a statistics exercise, an example of probability gone wrong. That's what Professor Edward Thorp's course, How to Gamble If You Must, was meant to be. He explained to students that every game in a casino is designed to beat you. The roulette wheel, the slot machines, the craps table, all tilted against the player. For every dollar you hand over, the house only gives you a fraction back. It was a mathematical certainty. But then he said something that stopped one student in his tracks. Blackjack is different. With the right system, you can turn the odds in your favor. The student's name was J.P. Masser. To most, it sounded like a theory too good to be true, but J.P. wasn't willing to let it go. He wanted proof. At MIT, proof meant computers. At the time, the Lincoln Laboratory in Lexington housed a massive mainframe, machines that could process calculations far beyond what any student could do by hand. J.P. wrote a program designed to simulate blackjack thousands of times, using a statistical technique called Monte Carlo simulation. Night after night, the machine ran endless blackjack hands. The results were undeniable. If a player kept track of the cards, if they adjusted their bets based on when the deck was stacked in their favor, they could swing the game. The advantage shifted from the casino to the player. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a hunch. The numbers proved it. But JP knew there was a difference between a computer model and a real casino. Atlantic City wasn't going to give him neat, predictable conditions. It would be smoke-filled, loud, chaotic. Dealers rushing hands, distractions everywhere. The only way to know if the math really worked was to try it for himself. So in 1979, JP and a small group of fellow students pooled their savings and headed south to Atlantic City. They argued over signals, over bet sizes, over how to apply the system. Within hours, their bankroll was gone. For most of the students, that was the end of the experiment. They packed up, went back to MIT, and forgot about blackjack. But not JP. Even with their failure, he saw something the others missed. The numbers worked. The system wasn't the problem. The team was. If blackjack could be beaten, it wouldn't be by a handful of amateurs fumbling through a weekend in Atlantic City. It would take discipline, a structure, a real team. And JP was determined to build it. Back in Cambridge, JP couldn't let the idea go. The failure in Atlantic City hadn't shaken his belief in the math. It had only confirmed that the missing piece was structure. So he began recruiting. He plastered posters around campus advertising a blackjack course. The headline was simple: How to Beat the Casino. Most students brushed it off as a gimmick, but a handful showed up, curious to learn. Among them was a professional poker player named Dave. Dave wasn't a student, but he understood risk. He believed JP's system had potential, enough that he pulled out $5,000 of his own money and handed it over. Go test it again, but do it right this time. It was December 1979. JP and a few recruits headed back to Atlantic City. The timing was perfect. A new regulation from the New Jersey Casino Commission had made it illegal to ban players for card counting. Casinos could glare, stall, and shuffle more often, but they couldn't show you the door. This time, the team kept their cool. They stuck closer to the system, and by the end of the trip, that $5,000 had turned into $20,000. It wasn't millions, but it was proof. For the next semester, JP kept recruiting. The team grew, but the structure didn't. They were still a loose collection of students playing under the same theory, but without consistency. Each person believed their own version of the system was better. Arguments broke out over signals, bet spreads, and even how much to risk in a single hand. The cracks were showing. JP had the vision, but he didn't have the discipline to hold it together. That's when he met Bill Kaplan. Kaplan wasn't just another gambler. He had walked into Las Vegas years earlier with $2,000 and walked out 9 months later with $40,000. He hadn't relied on luck. He had managed his play like a business. Every dollar tracked, every hand recorded, every strategy tested. When Harvard Business School discovered he'd taken time off to gamble, they revoked his acceptance. Kaplan didn't flinch. He argued that what he was doing wasn't gambling at all. We've analyzed the game down to the point that there's no risk. If you play it right, the advantage is ours. It's no different than running a company. Against all odds, Harvard bought it. Kaplan finished his MBA, but blackjack never left his mind. One night in Cambridge, over dinner at a Chinese restaurant, JP overheard him talking about Vegas. Kaplan's story sounded too familiar. JP introduced himself. Within minutes, they were trading strategies, comparing notes, realizing they were working toward the same goal. But Kaplan saw something JP didn't. When he tagged along on one of the team's Atlantic City trips, he was stunned at the chaos. Players weren't aligned. Everyone used different methods. They weren't a team. They were a dozen soloists, each playing their own songs. Kaplan told JP the truth. If you want this to work, you need discipline. One strategy, one system, and complete control over how the money is handled. It was a harsh reality, but JP knew Kaplan was right, so he handed him the reins. On August 1, 1980, the MIT Blackjack team was officially formed. 10 players, a bankroll of $89,000 funded by outside investors, a single unified strategy. This wasn't just a group of students anymore. It was a business, and it was about to change everything. August 1980. The MIT Blackjack team was no longer an idea scribbled on computer punch cards or a failed experiment in Atlantic City. Under Kaplan's direction, it was now a disciplined operation. 10 players, $89,000, a single mission: beat the casinos. The first step was training, not at a blackjack table, but in empty MIT classrooms. For months, recruits drilled on strategy until it was second nature. Every player started with basic strategy. The chart told you exactly what to do against any dealer's card. It was unforgiving. No gut feelings, no lucky hunches. If the chart said to hit on 16 against a 10, you hit. If it said to split, you split. Discipline came first. Then came card counting. Kaplan's team relied on the high-low system. Every card between 2 and 6 added +1 to the count. 10s, face cards, and aces subtracted 1. 7s, 8s, and 9s were neutral. It sounds simple on paper, but tracking that running count while watching the dealer, chatting with table mates, and fending off cocktail waitresses was something else entirely. Hours of practice followed. Recruits counted decks of cards in under 30 seconds, then again with distractions, blaring music, people shouting insults, dealers intentionally trying to confuse them. It was grueling, and for a reason. Casinos weren't classrooms, they were chaos. The final test was called the checkout, a simulation of the worst-case scenario. Other teammates would act as drunk players, obnoxious gamblers, even aggressive pit bosses. Recruits had to keep the count perfectly while maintaining their cover. If they slipped, even once, they failed. Only a fraction made it through. Those who did were ready to join the rotation. But Kaplan's genius wasn't just training individuals. It was designing a team system that maximized profits while minimizing risk. There were 3 main roles. The spotter. They played low stakes at multiple tables, keeping track of the count. If the deck turned favorable, they gave a subtle signal, scratching their ear, adjusting a tie, running fingers across chips. To everyone else, meaningless. To the team, it was the green light. The controller. They doubled down on the spotter's signal, verifying the count. A second layer of confirmation before bringing in the heavy guns. The big player. This was the hammer. The one who strolled up to the table, often dressed as a high roller, and immediately bet thousands per hand. To casino staff, they looked like rich gamblers with deep pockets and erratic play. In reality, every chip was calculated. The teamwork was seamless. A spotter could burn through hours at a table, barely noticed, while a big player might only appear for 10 minutes, long enough to cash in on a hot deck, then vanish. And when they hit the casinos, the results were instant. In their first 3 months, the team doubled their investors' money. $89,000 turned into nearly $200,000. Players were making $80 an hour, a staggering wage for undergrads in 1980. Investors saw returns of over 250% annually. By 1984, the team had grown to 35 players with over $350,000 in capital. Atlantic City, Las Vegas, Reno, Lake Tahoe. Everywhere the team went, they won. The casinos noticed. Pit bosses watched nervously as students in polo shirts calmly raked in stacks of chips. Dealers whispered when the same players placed massive bets at the exact right moment. But there was no proof of cheating, no hidden device, just brains. The comps rolled in. Free suites, steak dinners, private limos. Casinos believed these kids were whales, big players worth pampering. That only made it easier for the team to blend in. On weekdays, they were MIT students. Homework, lectures, problem sets. On weekends, they were high rollers, flying across the country to bleed casinos dry. It was the perfect double life. But Kaplan knew it couldn't last forever. The more they won, the more attention they drew. Surveillance cameras were everywhere. Casino security teams were getting sharper, and the house never stayed quiet when it was losing money. For now, though, the team was unstoppable. The math worked, the system was airtight, and for the first time in history, a group of college kids had turned blackjack into a business. What they didn't realize was that across the casino floor, the eyes of private investigators were already watching. By the early 1990s, the MIT blackjack team had become something casinos could no longer ignore. What began as 10 students and $89,000 had grown into a machine, dozens of players, millions in capital, and profits stacking higher each month. And that's when the casinos fought back. They turned to a private security firm feared by gamblers across the country, Griffin Investigations. Their specialty was identifying cheats, hustlers, and anyone with an edge against the house. Leading the charge was Andy Anderson, a silver-haired detective known on the strip simply as the man who never forgets a face. Anderson's job was simple: spot the big players, the ones betting thousands of dollars at just the right time. He would study their movements, note who they sat with, who they spoke to, who seemed to hover behind them. Within days, patterns emerged. What casinos couldn't prove with cameras, Anderson could build through observation. The MIT team had no idea at first. To them, Las Vegas was still a playground. Players like John Chang and Seymon Dukac were cashing in hundreds of thousands, flying home with suitcases full of chips and cash. On Sunday nights, they partied like royalty. On Monday mornings, they were back in classrooms pretending none of it had happened. But Anderson was closing in. Griffin Investigations published a regular dossier for casinos known as the Griffin Book. Inside were mugshots and names of known advantage players, and before long, photos of MIT students started showing up. At first, they didn't know how Griffin was getting them. Then came the discovery. A student had left behind a training manual, a detailed write-up of the team's system. Another time, the investigators posed as MIT students, purchased a yearbook, and scanned entire classes into their database. The result was devastating. Entire pages of the Griffin Book filled with MIT faces. Even students who weren't on the team suddenly had their likeness flagged in casino security systems. To survive, the team doubled down on disguises. Players shaved their heads, grew mustaches, dyed their hair. Some wore wigs and glasses. Others faked entire identities, posing as wealthy businessmen, Russian arms dealers, even cross-dressing to throw off recognition. One story told of a player arriving in a wheelchair, feigning disability, only to stand up and walk away hours later after cashing out. Another had John Chang dressed in full drag, a high roller in heels, trying to squeeze out one more weekend before being made. But even disguises couldn't mask patterns forever. Casinos shared information instantly. In Las Vegas, pit bosses faxed photos of suspected counters across the strip within minutes. By the time a big player walked into a new casino, staff were already waiting. International trips became just as dangerous. In Monte Carlo, 2 MIT players were quietly escorted off the floor, their cars searched, their photos sent back to Griffin. One was barred for life from re-entering Monaco. Still, the math was on their side. For every close call, the team had weekends where they cleared 6 figures. Profits soared past $900,000 in 1993. Strategic investments, their limited partnership, looked unstoppable. But winning came at a cost. Every dealer a trap. Players began to burn out, and the pressure was about to push the team to its breaking point. By mid-1993, the MIT Blackjack team was still cashing checks, still flying in and out of Vegas with suitcases full of cash. But beneath the surface, the operation was cracking. The first blow came from variance, the one thing even the best math couldn't eliminate. In the spring of '93, the team hit a losing streak that wiped out nearly half its profits in just a few months. Big players were sitting down at favorable counts, laying out 2 hands of $10,000 each, only to lose hand after hand. Investors were calling, demanding updates. Players were complaining about payouts, and the heat from casinos was relentless. Every time they landed in Las Vegas, pit bosses already knew their aliases. Surveillance cameras tracked them from the airport to the tables. At the same time, resentment inside the team was growing. Most of the players were pulling 48-hour marathons at the tables, risking fake IDs, enduring interrogations and disguise changes. Yet under the strategic investments model, investors got the lion's share of profits, while players received a salary and about 10% of the wins. Many began to feel like employees in a company they had helped build, but no longer controlled. Burnout followed. Some of the original players simply walked away. Others demanded bigger cuts. Kaplan and Chang tried to keep the structure intact, but the friction was obvious. And then came the bans. By late 1993, most of the senior members were plastered across the Griffin book. Security would meet them at the table, politely or not so politely, escort them to the door and confiscate chips. Trips now ended in losses or ejections. Inside the team's Cambridge headquarters, JP pushed for more caution. Kaplan wanted tighter controls. Players grumbled about the endless training and surveillance. Strategic investments, the sharpest blackjack operation in the world, now felt like a corporation on the verge of bankruptcy. In December 1993, after a particularly brutal quarter, the founders sat down and called it. Strategic investments would cash everyone out. Investors would get what was left of their money. The MIT Blackjack team, as the world knew it, was over. The breakup was anticlimactic. No final heist, no cinematic showdown. Just exhausted players, drained bank accounts, and a mountain of surveillance photos sitting in casino security offices across the globe. Yet even in its collapse, the team left a blueprint. They had proved it was possible to beat the house, but also how difficult it was to keep the edge once the house began to fight back. But while strategic investments shut down, the legend wasn't over. Not for the people who had built it, and not for the new generation watching from the outside. When strategic investments dissolved in 1993, many assumed it was the end. The casinos had won. The most disciplined, most successful card-counting team in history had finally folded under pressure. But for some of its players, walking away wasn't an option. One of them was Semyon Dukac. Unlike J.P. Masser, who was exhausted, or Bill Kaplan, who had shifted focus to real estate, Semyon wasn't ready to give up. He believed the structure could be rebuilt, not with outside investors, but with the players themselves. So he launched Amphibian Investments. The model was different. Players were also shareholders. If you risked the tables, you owned a piece of the profits. The team expanded through the mid-1990s, with over 60 members spread across 5 cities. Their winnings topped $4 million. Others followed suit. A separate splinter group nicknamed the Reptiles formed around the same time. Casino surveillance. Griffin Investigations refined its databases. International casinos began sharing information, and automatic shuffle machines were installed across the industry. The window for large-scale card-counting operations was closing. By the late 1990s, the MIT Blackjack team as a real functioning syndicate was gone. Most of its members drifted back to their original paths: engineering, mathematics, finance, startups, even teaching. The wild weekends in Vegas became memories, whispered stories that sounded too unbelievable to be true. But the legend only grew. Casinos responded in kind. They invested in more advanced surveillance. They trained dealers to shuffle more often. They installed continuous shuffle machines that killed the very possibility of long-term counting. The industry evolved to close the loophole. Today, their legacy is carried in whispers at blackjack tables, in strategy books, in forums where advantage players still dream of finding the next edge. And in every casino across Las Vegas, Atlantic City, and beyond, security staff still keep their eyes open because the house remembers the one time it didn't win. The MIT Blackjack team may have cashed out, but the story they left behind will never be forgotten. The house always wins, except when it doesn't.